Growing up as a little boy on the island of Jamaica in the early 1970s, I cherished the time I spent on the porch of my grandmother's simple two-bedroom ranch house in Kingston, the nation's capital. There, at 3 Windy Way in Harborview, a middle and working class neighborhood at the southern edge of the city, I would sit on the brown speckled tile, leafing through the pages of Encyclopedia Britannica, reading Bible stories, and poring over back issues of National Geographic for hours on end. As sea breezes stirred the needles of the casuarina trees that lined the front yard and shaded my world from both the sun and the gazes of people passing by on the sidewalk, scents from Grandma's kitchen, pumpkin soup, baking bread, brown sugar, and lime juice wafted through the air. Things only got better as the day progressed, and the sun made its arc through the cobalt expanse of the Jamaican afternoon sky. The approach of evening was always my favorite stretch of time, a welcome pause between the heat of day and the fall of darkness. Grandma, finished with her cooking and housework, would come outside and sit with me in the early evening air. Encouraging children to read and dream was what Grandma, a former schoolteacher, did best. And she never missed an opportunity to work with one of her favorite students. Sitting together in the fading light, we lost ourselves in conversation, accompanied by the pulse of chirping crickets, the reverberating reggae beats from a nearby rum shop, and the animated voices of young men playing soccer in the street. These are the sounds of the Caribbean, the lyrical backdrop to Grandma's outdoor classroom, where I asked question after question about the people and places I had encountered in the day's reading, and my ever-patient teacher shared with me facts and figures about distant lands. Yet the greatest lesson I learned from my grandmother came not from something she read to me, but from something she did for someone else. In Jamaica, as in many developing countries, poverty is never far away. On one occasion, the ambient sounds of those Caribbean evenings gave way to the piercing call of a woman at the front gate. "Mrs. Henry, Mrs. Henry, you dey so? Me beg you make me come in." When poverty calls to you from the front gate, you have to make a choice. You can avert your eyes, perhaps even turn your back and harden your resolve not to engage. But poverty will still be there looking at you, even if you don't have the courage to return its gaze. "Soon come," Grandma called out as she lifted her tiny, slightly hunched frame from the chair next to me, walked across the tiles, stepped from porch to carport, and made the 30-foot journey to the gate. "Good evening, Miss Mama. How are you?" Miss Mama's appearance belied her reply. "Me all right so far, Mrs. Henry." Miss Mama looked anything but all right to me as I watched her follow Grandma toward the porch. The closer Miss Mama came to my sacred classroom, the sharper the contrast I discerned between her and my beloved tutor. With bare feet, tattered clothes, matted hair, and a protruding belly, seemingly at odds with her thin frame, Miss Mama appeared to be from an entirely different planet than my grandmother, who, with her pressed and starched cotton dress and neatly groomed appearance, was the quintessential schoolteacher and matron of the Anglican Church. After inviting Miss Mama to sit down next to her and across from me, Grandma asked Miss Mama if she was hungry. Miss Mama replied, "Yes, Mrs. Henry. It's a long time me not eat, you know, ma'am." My grandmother disappeared inside, then emerged a few minutes later with a large tumbler of milk and a plate of warm, hard dough bread dripping with butter. I sat there, watching Miss Mama eat and listening to the exchange. My grandmother asking questions in the Queen's English, Miss Mama responding in patois. They continued on for some time, Miss Mama chronicling her tough circumstances, my grandmother offering words of comfort and encouragement, until the last crumbs disappeared from the plate. The milk was drained, and my grandmother sent Miss Mama on her way with the familiar Jamaican benediction. Walk good. I don't know how Miss Mama got her name, and I don't know where she came from, but I can picture her today just as I saw her in that first encounter in late 1977 when I was 8 years old. Over the next several months, Miss Mama appeared at my grandmother's front gate with increasing frequency. One day in 1978, following what turned out to be the last time I saw Miss Mama, I asked my grandmother, "Grandma, Miss Mama has a big belly, so why is she always hungry?" My grandmother replied that some people have big bellies not from eating too much, but because they never get enough to eat. For me, economics is all about Miss Mama. I was drawn to the subject because I wanted to help people in developing countries, like my native Jamaica, help themselves. Feeding the hungry is an act of kindness. Providing the hungry with the means to feed themselves is an act of empowerment that confers dignity as well as nourishment. My grandmother was too old and lacked the technical training to give people like Miss Mama that kind of enabling assistance. I wrote this book because I have no such excuse. Helping people to help themselves begins with a simple observation. Never in the history of the world has a country sustainably reduced poverty without significantly increasing its population's average overall standard of living. The gains from economic expansion may not be evenly distributed, so growth alone is not a sufficient condition for development, but it is absolutely necessary. Without growth, life becomes a series of zero-sum struggles directed at preserving one's share of limited resources. With growth, the pie expands, and the politics of distribution no longer involve such stark trade-offs. Because economic expansion provides the most reliable means of enabling the poor to lift themselves out of poverty, the critical question is, what kinds of economic policies lay the foundation for growth? The economic policy decisions implemented in the months and years ahead will determine whether people eat or starve, live or die, and not just in emerging economies. The financial crisis of 2008-2009 drove record numbers of people in the United States into unemployment, foreclosure, and poverty, to say nothing of the devastating impact of its aftershocks on the economies and people of Europe. Whether in the first world or the third, there is no place to hide from the power of policy. There's also no place for you to hide. It's a Thursday evening and you've come out to hear a talk about a book on economic policy, so you've got great courage. But I hope you can tell from that reading, this book is as much about humanity and relationships as it is about economic policy. And what I'd like to do with my remaining time before we open up for question and answer period is just give you a sense of what are really some critical issues. as I said in that last paragraph of the reading, we're at a really critical moment in the world economy.